Kamala Harris, like any politician, understands the value of packaging. In the same way that McDonald's wraps its Big Macs in bright, cheery packaging, Harris's campaign, along with the Democratic Party, has made extensive use of feel-good slogans and promises. A politician is nothing without a message that can be consumed quickly and easily. But how much substance lies beneath the layers of paper and catchphrases? For Harris, the optics are critical. As the first woman of color to hold the office of vice president, she embodies progress and change. Her campaign emphasizes unity, equity, and rebuilding trust in American institutions. To her supporters, Harris represents the promise of a future where diversity is not just celebrated, but actively incorporated into the fabric of governance. But critics argue that beneath this surface-level appeal, there's a disconnect between the image she projects and the policies she supports. Let's take the issue of police reform, a major talking point for Harris during her campaign for vice presidency in 2020. She spoke often about the need to reform law enforcement and address systemic racism. Yet her record as California's Attorney General, a role in which she was often criticized for being too lenient on police misconduct cases, paints a more complicated picture. Her critics see a politician whose words and actions don't quite align, much like a McDonald's commercial that promises a juicy, satisfying burger, but often delivers something more akin to a soggy mess. Harris has navigated these contradictions by sticking to broad, optimistic rhetoric. She speaks about change in sweeping terms, painting a picture of a better future without getting too deep into the nitty-gritty of how we'll get there. It's a familiar tactic. McDonald's does the same when it emphasizes convenience and satisfaction, while strategically avoiding discussions about the nutritional value of its food. Harris's campaign depends on keeping people focused on the shiny wrapper rather than the contents inside. The fast food analogy doesn't end with packaging. It extends to the menu itself. In a presidential campaign, candidates offer voters a menu of policies, positions, and promises, many of which are more about pleasing the masses than serving genuine long-term solutions. McDonald's, the king of fast food, knows that too much diversity on the menu can be confusing. That's why it sticks to its classic items, occasionally adding a new flavor or twist to keep things interesting, while maintaining the core that people recognize. Kamala Harris's campaign has followed a similar strategy. Her menu of talking points focuses on widely appealing issues: climate change, racial justice, economic recovery, healthcare reform. These are the political equivalent of McDonald's Big Mac, fries, and Coke, staples that voters have come to expect. Like the fast food giant, Harris also occasionally introduces a new item to keep the public engaged, such as a specific policy proposal or a new endorsement. But just like McDonald's limited time offerings, think the McRib, some of these policies seem to appear and disappear based on their appeal, not necessarily their feasibility. Take, for instance, Harris's stance on Medicare for all. During the 2020 primaries, she briefly endorsed a Medicare for all system, a bold and progressive position. However, she later walked back that support, favoring a more moderate, incremental approach to healthcare reform. Critics accused her of flip-flopping, introducing a policy that sounded great in theory but was quickly dropped when it became politically inconvenient. In this way, Harris's campaign resembles a McDonald's menu, where some items are there to satisfy a craving for bold change, but only until the moment the consumer starts asking questions about what's really in it. Fast food and political campaigns also share an uncomfortable relationship with misinformation. McDonald's, like many fast food companies, has faced criticism over the years for misleading advertising, whether about the healthiness of its food, the quality of its ingredients, or the conditions under which its meals are made. Kamala Harris, in the political arena, faces a parallel challenge: the spread of misinformation, both from her critics and at times her own camp. In today's hyper-partisan media environment, truth is often as difficult to come by as a nutritious fast food meal. Both Harris's detractors and supporters have been guilty of spinning the facts, leading to a political landscape where misinformation reigns. One of the most prominent examples is the ongoing debate over immigration. Harris has frequently been at the center of this issue, particularly due to her role as vice president overseeing the southern border crisis. During her campaign, she repeatedly promised to address the root causes of migration from Central America, painting a picture of a compassionate and humane immigration system. However, her critics argue that her actual policies, including the controversial detention of migrants and the slow pace of reform, don't align with her rhetoric. In the same way, McDonald's commercials often show perfectly cooked burgers that bear little resemblance to the real thing. Harris's critics accuse her of serving up an unrealistic image of her immigration policy. The administration's handling of the border has been a sticking point for many, who feel that Harris's promises have not materialized in the way they were advertised. It's the political equivalent of ordering a burger based on a picture, only to receive something far less satisfying when it arrives. Meanwhile, conservative media outlets have amplified this criticism, often stretching the truth in the process. Misinformation campaigns have claimed that Harris supports open borders or that she intends to dismantle ICE, claims that have no basis in her actual policy positions, but have been repeated enough times to gain traction among segments of the public. This is the political version of fast food marketing. The more you hear it, the more you believe it, regardless of its accuracy. Corporate interests and the drive-through presidency. Fast food is big business, and so is politics. The intersection of corporate interests and political campaigns is as ubiquitous as the presence of McDonald's in every major city. Both politicians and corporations rely heavily on marketing, lobbyists, and the careful crafting of public perception. McDonald's spends billions annually to maintain its image as an affordable and convenient option for consumers, while political campaigns spend equally large sums to convince voters they are the best choice for America's future. Kamala Harris, like many politicians, finds herself navigating the complex web of corporate influence. Her critics often point to her connections to Silicon Valley, where major tech companies have wielded enormous influence over political discourse. Harris, who hails from California, has long-standing ties to this industry, and while she has called for greater regulation of big tech, skeptics argue that her ties run too deep for her to push meaningful reforms. This is the political equivalent of McDonald's touting its fresh, never frozen beef, or its efforts to reduce plastic waste. While the company may make small, incremental changes, it's still a multi-billion-dollar corporation whose primary goal is profit. Similarly, Harris's critics argue that her push for tech regulation is more about optics than substance, an effort to appear progressive without truly taking on the industry's power. On the other hand, Harris's supporters see her corporate connections as an asset. They argue that her experience in dealing with powerful industries makes her uniquely qualified to enact meaningful reform. In their eyes, Harris is playing the long game, working within the system to change it from the inside. It's a bit like the McDonald's approach to healthy eating. Rather than abandoning its core menu, the company has gradually introduced healthier options, hoping to improve its image without alienating its customer base. The Happy Meal of campaign promises. One of the most enduring symbols of McDonald's is the Happy Meal, a product designed to appeal to both children and their parents. It's small, colorful, and comes with a toy, making it a perfect metaphor for the way political campaigns package their promises. Just as McDonald's uses the Happy Meal to draw in young customers and create a lifelong brand loyalty, politicians use simplified, optimistic promises to win over voters and build a coalition. Kamala Harris, as a candidate and a sitting vice president, has had to walk the fine line between making bold promises and managing expectations. Take, for example, her stance on climate change. During her campaign, Harris has positioned herself as a champion of environmental justice, advocating for aggressive policies to combat climate change. However, the reality of implementing such policies, especially in a divided Congress, has proven to be much more complicated. To many voters, Harris's climate promises are the political equivalent of a Happy Meal. They sound great in theory, but they come with a lot of fine print. The challenges of passing meaningful climate legislation, combined with the economic realities of transitioning away from fossil fuels, mean that Harris's environmental platform is likely to be more incremental than transformational. Critics argue that this is a classic bait-and-switch tactic, where politicians promise sweeping changes during the campaign, but deliver far less once in office. Supporters, however, see it differently. They view Harris's pragmatism as a strength, arguing that real change takes time and that incremental progress is better than no progress at all. The Final Bite: Truth, Lies, and Political Nutrition. As the 2024 presidential campaign progresses, the American public finds itself once again at the political drive-thru, faced with a menu of options that promise much, but often deliver less than expected. Kamala Harris, like every candidate before her, must navigate a landscape where perception is often more important than reality, where corporate interests and misinformation play an outsized role in shaping public opinion. In the end, the question isn't just whether we want lies with our political rhetoric. It's whether we've become so accustomed to them that we no longer notice. Just as millions of people continue to eat at McDonald's despite knowing that it may not be the healthiest option, many voters continue to support candidates based on the carefully crafted images they project, even when the reality is more complex. Kamala Harris's campaign, like the fast food industry, is built on a delicate balance of promises, perceptions, and compromises. The challenge for voters in 2024 will be to see past the packaging, to dig beneath the surface, and to decide whether what's being offered is truly nourishing or just another supersized serving of political fast food. In this metaphorical showdown between Kamala Harris and McDonald's, it becomes clear that both politicians and corporations rely heavily on marketing, public relations, and the power of narrative to shape public perception. While Harris navigates the treacherous waters of the presidential campaign, she, like McDonald's, must balance the demands of the public, the influence of powerful interests, and the reality of delivering on promises. As voters, we must ask ourselves, do we want truth with that? Or are we content with the convenient, neatly packaged narratives that have become so much a part of our political and cultural diet?